Hello and welcome to today's IEA debate on corporate wokery. My name is Kristian Nimeietz and I am the head of political economy here at the IEA. And I'm joined today by two of my esteemed colleagues, by Sam Collins, who is a Senior Policy Advisor here, and by Dr. Jamie Whyte, a Senior Research Fellow. For a long time, there used to be an unwritten rule that the world of business, the corporate world, stays out of politics, or that at least when you are acting in a business role, you don't comment on political matters. And that seems to have changed in recent years. It's now become much more common that companies, large corporations in particular, feel obliged routinely to signal their progressive credentials. And that means that whether they call it that or not, they are wading in on the culture war. And that's an issue which liberals are somewhat divided about. Some on the liberal side say, well, that's not our business to comment on this. This is private companies, they can do whatever they like. It's none of our business. But others do believe that this does create an anti-liberal climate, which liberals should be concerned about, even if it isn't directly linked to state power and legislation. Sam, I'm going to start with you. I take it you are on the more agnostic, relaxed side of this argument, but it would not be unprecedented for liberals to take a view on what private companies are getting up to. Milton Friedman was famously critical of the idea of corporate social responsibility, right? In a way that was often misunderstood, misinterpreted, where he simply said, look, if individual company owners or company employees want to be charitable and philanthropic, that's fantastic, let them do it. But why do they have to do this through the company? Why is the company the right medium, especially if you are if you are an employee of the company and if it's not yours? Now, isn't this the same thing? If liberals in earlier decades criticized corporate social responsibility, why can't we criticize corporate wokery today?
Thank you, Kristian. I do want to say from the offset, I have no objection to individuals having a view on corporate wokery. The 2 points I have an issue with are, firstly, any role for the state, and we're seeing this in large parts of the post-liberal right, especially in America, people saying that we ought to be using the power of the state to force companies to stop being woke, which I think both Jamie and I would agree with, although I don't want to put words in his mouth, would agree that is definitely not a route we should be going down. But I also think that there is a lot of danger if we move towards any sort of collective action, and sort of boycotts, etc., because that will lead to a situation where, in the medium term, we're not talking about this is happening immediately, but where you have effectively a country divided against itself, or a world divided against itself between two political groups that just do not interact with one another through the marketplace or through any other sort, especially if this starts to be expanded to social media and we end up with a conservative Facebook and a left-wing Facebook. We're just going to have two polities who have nothing, who have...
Let me come in here. Because I think this brings things into focus. I mean, I was going to say what I think is wrong with corporate wokery and why we must resist it, precisely because I think it has the effects that you worry that fighting it will have. So let me say what I mean. It used to be that a company just did what it did. I don't know, makes widgets, I don't know, as a consulting firm that advises its clients on how to make more profit or whatever it is. Now almost every company is an enterprise that does something like that, like making widgets, and a fighter for social justice or whatever it may be. So there's always this progressive political bolt-on to the offering. And that's bad in two ways, because it means that I can't, every time I'm doing business, I'm not just buying a widget, right? I'm buying a widget and endorsing that agenda. I mean, think of it like this. And so it's inherently, it means society can't be as pluralistic and tolerant as it was. I mean, here's a simple analogy. Take a tennis club, right? Tennis clubs are great places. I used to be a member of a tennis club in New Zealand. I was very keen on tennis. And what brings everybody to the tennis club is tennis. They all like tennis. they can be politically left, politically right, religious, atheist, you name it. It's just tennis that they're there for. Well, if they said, "Oh, this is a tennis club and a trans rights organization," that wrecks it for the people who just want to go there for the tennis. And it also means that people don't. One of the delights of the old days when it was just tennis was this mixing, this cultural mixing around some simple common interest. And a company can be the same. I mean, in the old days when I worked in consulting, it was very diverse, actually, my firm. They didn't try to be diverse. They didn't have that as their goal at all. But there were plenty of women, plenty of Asians and whites, and it was a real mix in different religions, gays, but it wasn't an agenda. It wasn't something you had to buy into, right? You just turned up as an individual. And now it's a bloody agenda. And so I think that what you say is going to be the result of resisting is the result of the wokery. Right? It pushes us apart into camps.
So my pushback on that would be that I agree with you to a point, but the thing that concerns me is that at the moment we have woke companies and we have companies that just don't engage with it at all. The concern I have with any sort of collective action against wokery is that we're going to end up with two directly opposed camps, literally a woke camp and an anti-woke camp instead of a woke camp and everybody else. And so I think that if we just let the markets, if we just let individuals come up with make their own decisions in the marketplace without trying to force some sort of anti-woke agenda onto because I think that trying to force an anti-woke agenda into companies is just as bad as trying to force a woke agenda. You end up with, and if, in some ways you almost empower the wokesters to keep pushing because you're building your own camp on the other side, and you just start playing off one another until there's no center ground at all. And you see that I think we've seen that in politics. And so I'm very concerned that if we go down that route in business as well, it's going to end a lot worse than where we are now.
Yeah, let's talk about what that could mean in practice, an anti-woke agenda. Jamie, surely you wouldn't be opposed to individuals deciding to boycott a woke company if they said, we don't buy into this agenda, we weren't, as you said, the tennis club, we wanted to be agnostic, and we go to some other organization now. The problem with that is that even though that would be perfectly legitimate for individuals and groups of individuals, self-organized groups, to decide to boycott a company, is this really something that liberals should be endorsing? Because I quite like the idea that in a market economy I can interact with people whose values I don't share, or that I don't even have to know anything about. I bought a coffee this morning. I have no idea whether the person who sold me that coffee, I have no idea what they make of Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion. I don't know whether they voted Leave or Remain, and I quite like the fact that I don't have to know that.
That's what I like too. But when suppose you went to the coffee shop and they had a big sign up saying, "We support Black Lives Matter and 20p from every cup of coffee goes to Black Lives Matter," you might not go to that shop anymore. I don't eat Ben and Jerry's because they are just nauseating wokesters. And I haven't organized a boycott of them, but I personally just don't buy it. Similarly, I got off Facebook a while ago, in part because they were canceling too many people that I thought were harmless. And so I think that it's quite appropriate for a liberal to, think of it this way, it's just adding wokery is a product feature now. It's another feature of the brand or the product that they're offering, and I don't like that brand anymore, and I'm not going to use it. Now, that is a perfectly market-based response. And I think I won't tell other people what to do. Maybe they don't care, but I do care enough that I'm not going to use them. I don't want to organize a boycott. I don't want marches down the street against Ben and Jerry's. I'm with Sam on that, but I think it's completely appropriate to change your purchasing behavior according to the product offering.
Sam, you said you wouldn't want a specific anti-woke market segment, but isn't this really the only way in which you can counter this trend? Because it may well be true that woke progressives are a minority of the population, But it is not unusual that minorities that are vocal about something and more passionate about something than most people get their way. And I'm not just talking about the political process, but in a market economy as well. If you think about the beer market, that's a market where there is a group, which I'm part of, which is the group of beer snobs, who are punching well above their weight. I mean, craft beer as a percentage of total beer sales is a tiny percentage. Nonetheless, nowadays, pretty much any pub will have at least one more exotic, unusual beer. And that's because the craft beer types, annoying people like me, are the ones who would, for example, write a TripAdvisor review or would post something on Twitter saying this pub has a fantastic beer selection. Well done, great. Whereas the Heineken drinker doesn't do that. So, of course, we punch above our weights because we are more vocal and outspoken than others. Aren't woke people sort of the equivalent of that?
I mean, so the big difference I would draw with that comparison is that in most cases, wokey type people aren't actually willing to put their money where their mouths are. You see people going in and complaining about, so it will be the equivalent of, I suppose, having a whole bunch of non-alcohol drinkers writing to a pub and saying, you've got beer on your taps and we don't like that. But then the company says, oh, no, well, okay, we're going to take all the beer taps away. And then the non-alcohol drinkers don't even go in and drink anyway, drink anything else. So I think that, so I don't actually think that I don't have any objection. If a company wants to be woke, that's fine. I actually have no objection to that because it's an open marketplace. They're competing for people's funds. If enough people want to go to this company that gives 20p of every pound to BLM, that's great. If they want to go to a bar that only sells craft beer, that's fine. The thing I'm worried about is when they force everybody else down that road. So, and this is why I think we don't need to take any collective action, because I think the market is providing all this. The marketplace is already stepping in and leading to a lot of these companies going, if not going bankrupt, then at least doing an awful lot worse than they would be if they weren't being woke. I mean, Unilever is a perfectly good example who under their incredibly woke CEO has, I think, lost something in the ballpark of 150 million pounds over the past year. You look at the difference between, Spider-Man, No Way Home and The Eternals, one of which was just focused on the storyline and made $1.7 billion. The other one was ticked every single diversity box you could imagine, and I think made $400 million. I think the market is actually solving this problem. If companies want to go off and be woke, that's fine. They have to live with the consequences. And I think the market's already sorting this out.
Well, I hope that's right. And I'm sure it is when it comes to art. I mean, woke storylines are just, well, they don't latch on to reality, psychological reality in any way, so they don't really work very well. But I think there's something that I really do resent about woke corporations and woke executives. So here's let's go back to John Stuart Mill. So John Stuart Mill, when he was writing On Liberty, stressed that he wasn't just talking about state regulation. He was also talking about society. He said people should not take an interest even in what other people do unless those other people are harming them. And he was thinking about, at his time, he was thinking a bit more about religious intolerance, actually, and moral intolerance based on religion. And I think that at this moment, we've got something a bit like that. So it's not the state doing all this, right? It's a kind of section of society. Let's think of them as religious people. And they run around screaming the whole time and pointing at people and saying, look, that person's an atheist. That person's an atheist. What are you going to do about it? And then they try to get the person fired, and they try to have all sorts of kind of social penalties applied to the person because they're an atheist, they're a heretic of some kind. And the appropriate response of grown-ups is to say, shut up, leave that person alone, and go away and mind your own business. And when corporate executives don't do that, they don't have the backs of their employees, and they don't try to make the commercial world an open, a tolerant sphere of enterprise, right? Promoting the kind of cosmopolitanism that we've enjoyed for the last couple of centuries, or the last 50 years at least. They do harm to society, I think. They've got a right to do it. They've got a legal right to do it, but I think they are harming society. And it's appropriate for people like us who value pluralism and tolerance and so on to say, you're a bad guy. You shouldn't be doing this. You're pandering to hysterical moralist, let's be blunt here, bastards, and you shouldn't pander to people like that.
Can I just
why can't I say that?
No,
I can.
sorry,
you don't mind if I say that?
Can I just ask a question, because I'm curious what you think on this, because surely there must, some of this has come around through state action, you know, the implementation of diversity quotas, the idea that, you know, bringing in regulations around various sort of, that might not be specifically woke, but have led to the rise of sort of woke ideology. I'm just curious whether or not you think that that this is really a private problem, or if this is something that's come across from the states getting involved in this thing to start with.
I suspect it's that the state, I mean, Kristian and I have discussed this before, I suspect that on the whole, the state is following what it thinks is, the government's following what it thinks is where society is leading it. So it's responding to what it takes to be pressure from the electorate. But I do think that one of the, I mean, insofar as the state gets involved and has laws, you know, against various kinds of speech laws and discrimination laws and so on, it only helps the woke people to bully other people. You know, makes more of an atmosphere of fear, because you've got both social fear and legal fear now to worry about. So again, you know, I do think the state's got some blame here, but things are much worse than just the law makes it, right? I mean, the culture of fear that people operate in, just about telling a joke in the lunchroom of a modern corporation is an incredibly perilous business, you know, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, Sam, surely this is something that can also work in our favor. There is now a bit of a backlash against wokery, whether that's in the corporate sector or elsewhere. And a lot of this, at least in Britain, I get the impression is, you could say, proto-liberal. It's not like in the US, where this often has a Trumpite populist feel, but here it's more of a just leave me alone kind of thing. And surely this is something that liberals can work with. If we don't engage in the culture war, aren't we missing a trick here? That there could be some people who might be part of a coalition, and if they get the impression that we are on their side on culture war issues, they might also look more favorably on our views on economic liberalism.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Although I think it's more likely to go in the opposite direction. It seems, you know, at least, I mean, obviously not liberals, but it seems that from a sort of greater political point of view, it seems that people who are economically interventionist and socially liberal seem to be dragging the Overton window in their direction rather than coming over and joining us on our side. So I don't think that's a winning policy.
No,
I think
I'm afraid I don't either, Kristian. I think that insofar as the culture war keeps getting fought, and here I'm going to sound a bit like Sam, but this is a point I wanted to make earlier. But it's the question is, how should we fight the culture war, right? You did ask that. If we're going to fight it, how should we fight it? My fear is that it'll be a bit like Brexit. So with Brexit, some people, Dan Hannan, people like that, were saying, oh, after Brexit, it's going to be a liberal paradise in Britain. You know, it's going to be Singapore, not that Singapore's liberal, actually, I don't know why they say that, but Singapore on 10. It's going to be like 1890 again, except, you know, richer. And it's not, right? It's nationalistic, it's collectivist, it's all those things. And, you know, the main people on the non-woke side fighting the culture war are kind of American conservatives of a certain ilk, as you say, kind of Trumpy type ilk, and the so-called post-liberal types. And, you know, I think some people have been so enraged by this kind of wokeness that they've jumped over to the opposite extreme. And they've got a lot in common, those two groups, right? They're trying to impose on everybody a certain cultural outlook. And we're not trying to do that. So I think that's an interesting question. When you fight it, how do you fight it? Do you say, no, you shouldn't be teaching kids about homosexuality at school, you should be teaching them about Christianity? And I want to say, just don't play these games at all. But that's a very weak, that's hard for people to latch onto. We're offering an abstract principle, whereas the post-liberals are offering some solid ideas to get a grip on. We should have the church at school and stuff like that. So I don't think the culture war helps us, actually. The happiest time for us was the 1990s. And that was an era of very little kind of cultural conflict.
Well, we didn't know how good we had it at the time.
We sure didn't.
It didn't seem like we had all back then.
But but I think that the problem that we're talking about here, about this polarization, it's being caused by the wokies. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's not. Sam thinks we can avoid it. But I don't think we can avoid it. It's too late.
Well, the avoidance bit. I mean, Sam, you said that the market is already taking care of this. We'll sort this out. But then, who is the market? The market is just the sum of its participants. And you are one of those participants. You are not some outside observer who has nothing to do with the market. You have a platform. This is a platform. You are on one right now. So why not use that platform to engage in a culture war?
Well, I've got no objection to. I mean, I make my own decisions for what I buy and who I buy it from, and some of that is based on, I suppose, on politics. But and I've got no objection to people say, like, I don't know, Ben Shapiro giving a bad review to the Star Wars films, saying that they're too woke, and people listening to that and deciding what to do from there. I think that each person individually in the marketplace, looking at what businesses do and deciding whether or not they want to come, or not they want to buy from those businesses, is perfectly reasonable and actually, great. That's the way that the market will stop wokey companies from continuing to be so. The thing that concerns me is the next step up from there, when a group of those people come together and say, no, we are going to stop. We are going to protest outside business X because we think that they are terrible. I mean, for example, the second Star Wars sequel film, and I know, Jamie, I take your point that art is not normal as far as these businesses are concerned. The second Star Wars film, I watched it. You know what? I hated it. I really didn't like it and a large part of it was because of the political messaging that went through it. I just didn't watch the third film. I sat on my £13 or however much it cost to go to the movie theatre and just didn't engage. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. I just don't want to see it. It's the rage and the real coming apart of the polity that you get from having these two quasi, intellectually armed groups going at each other all the time that I think is the real danger.
Yeah, that is clearly the big change that's happened over in recent years. It used to be, not so long ago, it used to be the case that you had the woke progressives who were constantly hysterical about something. And on the other side, you had people who simply said, well, calm down. This is just a movie. This is just an advert. This is just a product. I remember a couple of years ago, there was this advert on the London Underground which showed a model in a bikini, and it had this slogan, are you beach body ready? And there was a huge backlash against that, with campaigners saying this is body shaming and so forth. And it was, in the end, it was taken down. I can't remember what the advert was for, probably some sports brand. And it was the people on, you could say, our side who took the relaxed view and said, well, calm down, this is just a poster, it can't hurt you. But now you have the anti-wokies who are sometimes just as furious when, say, there is a remake of some movie where they like the original version, and there is now whatever, it may have some slight woke message, or there is some ethnic minority person in a lead role who wasn't there before. and they go berserk and say, but this isn't the way I remember the movie from my teenage years and so forth. Is that a thing, Jamie? Do you see that too? That's the reason why we can't have a coalition really here with conservative culture warriors.
I am seeing that, and it's funny. You know, it's sad. It's also a bit funny. You know, people do get driven mad by fighting, and they end up often resembling their opponent. I mean, so they've got almost everything in common in terms of their goal to impose their own cultural values on everybody. And they think people who don't go along with them should be socially punished somehow, and many want them to be legally punished. I mean, and both sides are doing it now. And so I'm with Sam on that, finding that a concern. And so it comes back to the question of how we should fight this. And, you know, we got to stick to our guns and just push tolerance and liberalism. And it goes in both directions, right? Being tolerant means you're tolerant of somebody who comes up with a woke movie. I mean, you don't have to go to it, and hopefully a lot of people don't go to it, but we should have no objection to them making it. And I think we need to take a kind of position of superior, be a bit superior, kind of laugh at everybody involved in this game. Aren't they silly? Look at them. They're rather hysterical and get wound up about such little things, and they're a big bunch of babies. Maybe that's the kind of attitude to take. Try to be the grown-ups, you know, the urbane, civilized ones who shrug their shoulders and laugh it off, you know.
I also think that, because I think you're absolutely right, Jamie, but I think as well there's an assumption by a lot of the anti-wokies that all content is directed at them or should be directed at them. And so they see anything that doesn't reflect what they think a film or a product or a, you know, IP should be as being woke and something they should fight against, when actually it's just segmentation of the market. I mean, it might be that if somebody wants to remake Superman with an all-black cast, it's because it's focused at African Americans.
Yeah, I mean, well, we had the
United States, and that's fine.
Movie. Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, if you want to see this kind of segmentation, just have some daughters. So the kind of films and TV programs that, you know, young women, I mean, like preteen girls and early teen girls want to watch, you know, I can't bear it. I think this stuff's dreadful, but because it's not aimed at me, it's aimed at them, and it's you know, it's not. I don't even think that stuff you might look at and think, oh, that's a bit woke. I don't think it is at all. It's not that they're trying to be woke. It's just that they are addressing an audience who have different sensibilities from you and me, and they're catering to them. I agree with you entirely about that. I mean, I'm with you. I resented what they did to Star Wars, but, you know, I don't know. I think most people did, but I guess a few didn't. But just don't go.
Yeah,
well, I'm afraid that's all we got time for. But I think we can certainly agree on Jamie's point that liberals should take the smart, superior side on this issue and just make fun of everybody.
You do that on every issue, Kristian.
Well, if it fits, yes, and it leads back to the topic I raised earlier on the beer snobbery. I think maybe this is a good model, a form of liberal culture war snobbery. Thank you both for joining me today, and thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got plenty more coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.